Hello and welcome to another Meta Monday. Not a lot of events this weekend, so we'll spend a little bit more time taking a larger look at the meta, especially with the WTC coming up here soon. My name's Ryan. I used to be good at Warmachine. Welcome to Spell Rack. All right, in this light week for events, we're going to cover three smaller tournaments, and then we'll take a bigger look at where the meta sits. In size order, the first one we had was in St. Louis with 16 players. Congratulations to Mark Taylor. Mark's an old friend who used to live in Houston. I'm in Dallas. He used to play in that Will Pagani meta that existed back in Mark II. Obviously, Mark's been around for a while, but did very well with Dusk, bringing Dusk to 4-0. What I do think is interesting here is he played Helith in every round, and the list he played with Helith was Double Phantasm. So it's something where I've asked the question, does Helith change the meta? It's a smaller event to so very quickly round out the rest of the top 8. Winter Core at 3-1, Infernals at 3-1, Sea Raiders at 3-1. That's a pretty good little diversity there. Factions that you wouldn't see as commonly, except for Infernals, in the top spots. Then because it's a small event, you end up with 2-2s with tiebreakers, but we have Cricks, Old Umbry, Gravediggers, and again, Sea Raiders. Good, really balanced mix. The next event is only 13 players out of Sweden, but always a great meta in Sweden. I'll just talk about the top 4. Top 4 is Signar and then Gravediggers at 3-0. And then we have a Crix and another Gravediggers coming in those second spots. Again, Gravediggers seem to be this faction that has come on very strong lately. Our final event that we'll look at is in Poland, another very strong meta. This one only had 12 players. So again, we'll just stop at the first 4. We got some old Menoth here, Brian Bloods, Dark Operations, and then Convergence. So across the whole weekend, across each of the events, pretty even balance of faction distribution that just shows, I would say, a pretty healthy meta state. All right, so now let's look at Longshank's data and let's look at the last 3 months. This is going from back into July. For the 3 months of data, it's singles events only, and I exclude virtuals always. Here, we've seen Grimkin popping up recently. Here's Old Umbry still sitting at 60%. I believe they've been hovering around that 59 or 60% level. Here we have Aslanov at 68%. Last week when we did this, it was at 69. These are some pretty scary numbers. Kova, who was very popular for the WTC, has been putting in a rather low win rate. Last week she was at 50%, now at 45. Just very interesting to see that she was the warcaster that a lot of people picked, although it's clear that the faction is kind of crutching on Aslanov at this point, although Lysia doing very well as also. Infernal staying strong at 58. We'll jump down here to Storm Legion. Storm Legion has consistently been in this mid-50s range. Same thing for Brian Bloods. They've been mid-50s. Kind of cool to see Crucible Guard here at 53, especially because they're the newly announced, they will be the next 3D printed faction. We'll see them doing better and better. Gravediggers used to be in the sort of mid-40s, high 40s, and they continue to do very well as people have figured them out. As discussed previously, Shadowflame has dropped a little bit. Used to be mid-50s, and now they're hovering around 51. Crix, same boat. Crix used to be high 50s, now down here at 49. Kythos still at 54%. Actually seems pretty healthy. Maybe Kythos is not the boogeyman that I had marked him out to be, or he's just that significantly meted against. Sea Raiders at 48, Dusk at 48, Dark Operations at 47, and now we have to go find Winter Core as our last ones. They're at 44. As a little bit of a different perspective, I thought I would also look at the last 6 months of data. This gives us certainly pre-Umbry data, and really goes back to April. That's even pre kind of Kythos introduction. I just thought it would be interesting to look at a longer term data set. This gets us a little bit more of almost a look at like year to date. You sort of have the January update, but then you need a few months to figure things out. And I would say if we were looking at 2025, this is kind of where I would cut the 2025 meta. Though I think the 3-month data is more relevant, it's still interesting to look at. So Infernals here are the highest at 62. So obviously Infernals have come down a tiny bit. Old Umbry basically still at the same point of 59, Brimkin at 59. And see, here's where the difference is, right? Crix is still at 54 if we look at the last 6 months. When you're looking at the last 3 months, they've gotten a lot worse recently. Crix was a big boogeyman or mid-year, and now not so much. Storm Legion continue to be very solid at 54. They were at 55. A very strong faction. Shadow Flame at 53. You know, again, this is the full 6 months. When you look at only the last 3 months, they're at 51. So that would imply that they should have been at 55 for the prior 3 months. And Shadow Flame has definitely taken a step down. Blood Brines at 52, so they've stayed solid. Sea Raiders, you know, I feel like I've given Sea Raiders a hard time, and I've said that they've been doing better recently because their win rates are in the 50s. But looking at the last 6 months, they've always kind of been around this 51% win rate. So maybe Sea Raiders not as bad off as I've kind of accounted for them before. They're not where Signar is. And now that Crix has kind of come down a step, because it kind of felt like Crix and Signar were the two kind of leading factions with Infernals, obviously. And then Old Umbry comes on board and kind of smashes everybody. And so the meta feels bad right now, I would say, between Infernals and Old Umbry. And then I thought it was Crix and Storm Legion as kind of the number 2 spot, but Crix has fallen off. And Sea Raiders has stayed solid around that 50% points. Depending on what Steamforged is aiming for on the newer factions, I don't know if they want the newer factions to be maybe slightly above 50%. Maybe Sea Raiders looking a little bit more balanced than I initially gave them credit for. Gravediggers, again, doing the opposite of what Crix and Shadowflame are doing. Gravediggers have seen a foothold in the meta in the last few months. Last 6 months, not looking so hot, but people have finally figured them out. There's some meta lists out there now, and Gravedigger's doing very good today, even though they were 49 for the last 6 months. Dusk, second to worst of the Mark IV factions at 47. In the last 3 months, this has come up to 49. They've just kind of been in a tough spot all year. And then Winter Core, they've been kind of still stagnated down in that mid 40s spot. So Winter Core kind of consistently in a tough spot. So that's your meta. It's a short week. We'll see how the WTC goes, and then we'll see how Lock and Load wraps up the end of the year, and eventually we can do a year in review episode. But as far as people looking forward to your last events for the year, really this 3-month data is where I would be looking as you're trying to figure out what the game state is looking like. Clearly, Old Umbry is the number one target that you got to look out for. And then Infernals right behind them. And then obviously Signar still just very strong. Let's look real quick at the leaders in Signar. So looking at win rates in games played, Kane, high win rate, but low games played. Calder and Huxley are your list pair. I mean, look at the size of the games played between these casters. It's very clear who is common here. It's Calder and Huxley. Calder at 57, Huxley at 54. So that's your list pairing that you're going to be looking for Signar as you're preparing for the, final weeks. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Talk to you next time. Thanks.